Hello, my fellow geeks. Welcome to episode number 59 of the Indian AvGeek. My name is Vishal Mehra. Most of us consider it a win if we get an extra inch of legroom or maybe a jungly sandwich and a drink in a paper cup. But today's guest operates in a world where the cabin is more like a Mumbai penthouse. The range is anywhere on the planet, and the only thing more impressive than the wing folding technology is the size of the onboard dining table. Today, we are going inside the flying boardrooms of the world with Chris Shindle, the man who helps the world's most powerful people decide which version of a Boeing airliner they want to turn into their personal sanctuary. He is the director for marketing at Boeing Business Jets. We are talking competition, we are talking billion-dollar hangars, and much more. Chris, welcome to the Indian AvGeek.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Pleasure to have you on the show. How did you and aviation happen, Chris?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's almost happenstance. But I always had like a passion for aviation. As a little boy, going to aviation shows, air shows, mostly on the defense side here in the United States, F-15s, F-14s flying around, things like that, C-141s. But there was always this passion for aviation. But it never realized until I got to the university and I majored in mechanical engineering. And in the state of Washington, there's not a lot to do as a mechanical engineer. It's pretty much aviation. But at the time, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just thinking about a different career. Happened to be at our career services building at the university, saw that Boeing was interviewing for mechanical engineers. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll consider this. I don't know. This seems interesting. I like airplanes. Boeing's a big aviation company, kind of iconic when it comes to the United States and just aviation in general. Interviewed, got the job as a structures engineer doing design work in CATIA on 757 landing gear structures. So I did that for a while as an engineer, got my feet wet, if you will. But I left the company for a while, worked in automotive. I'm a big car guy, so it was kind of a dream come true to work in automotive. But my heart pulled me back to aviation again. Reached out to a mentor, a previous manager, and came back to Boeing again as a structures engineer because material strengths is my area of expertise. Came back as an analyst doing material strengths, stress and strain, Young's modulus, damage tolerance on movable trailing edge of the 737. I worked on the 737-900ER and then also on P-8 Poseidon. And then that's kind of how I was doing all the technical side of it. But then I went to basically an internal presentation about sales and marketing. And I fell in love with the customer work they were doing, both on the business aviation side and the commercial aviation side. And that's when my profession stayed in aviation, but I pivoted out of technical and went into more marketing. And so stayed there ever since and bounced around, tried a few things. And that same mentor from back in the day led me to leadership, brought me into a leadership role where now I'm leading teams and I've been doing that for the last few years. And again, that same mentor had me come over to business aviation to lead the marketing organization for Boeing Business Jets now, which is where I'm currently at. So I've had a bit of a zigzag in my aviation career, but it was always about the passion coming back to it. And now being on the business aviation side, it's far different than commercial, where 20 years of my experience is in commercial aviation and only 2 or 3 is in business. But it's been exciting. So it's been a little bit of a happenstance. Like I didn't go in, but expecting to interview for Boeing, and all of a sudden my career has been built around this entire organization, which has been really exciting, Vishal.
Planes and cars. Can't complain much about that.
Yeah, right.
I was going through Honeywell's Global Business Aviation Outlook. It expects about 8,500 new business jets to be delivered globally in the next decade or so. What is Boeing's view on business aviation globally, Chris?
Yeah, it's really a good question because when you think about the Boeing company, you think about commercial aviation, right? 737, 787s, 47s, 777s. So a huge amount of our revenue generation comes from our commercial aviation division. However, Boeing Business Jets is a component of that, right? We are a piece of BCA. So that's really important. So to answer your question briefly, it's Boeing sees business aviation as a huge revenue generator for the company, but also a huge partnership entity because BBJ is partnered with head of state customers, with VIP customers, with charter, with corporations. So it's just as important as our commercial operations. So they see it as a big component of that. It's highly visible. I mean, yes, you see 100 777s flying around with Emirates Airline. That's a big deal, or 110 aircraft order at Alaska Airlines. Very big, newsworthy things. But it's equally important for us to sell aircraft for head of state or VIP aircraft in the country of India. So it's very, very critical to our relationships politically, but also it's a great revenue generator for the company as well.
And the Indian market for business aviation? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start a little bit with commercial and won't go down that path too far, but we start with our commercial market outlook. And you mentioned what Honeywell was talking about for business aviation. We do some of similar analysis on our commercial side with our commercial market outlook. And you see a country like India, it's growing at like 7% year over year, almost 2, 3 times global GDP, right? So it's a very warm, growing, very hot growing market. The same it can be said in business aviation. You start to look at the departures per year, per month, and you're seeing that growing across the board for business aviation, from small jets to big bizliners as well, like Airbus and Boeing create. So that's just showing there's a significant amount of growth in India. So for me personally, we're spending a significant amount of time thinking about what our marketing activities are going to look like in India. What's the customer segment look like? Are we positioning the products correctly? Are they priced appropriately? Does it have all the capabilities that the customers are looking for to make sure that we're competitive in that space? So I would essentially say that we're doubling down on India. We've spent a significant amount of in China, and India is that next big thing where we aviation growing significantly.
India's billionaire class has traditionally favored purpose built jets like Gulfstreams or Bombardiers for their speed. How do you convince an Indian promoter that the extra twice more or thrice the cabin volume of a BBJ 737 MAX is worth the trade off in speed, especially when they are flying 8 to 10 hour missions to London or Tokyo?
Yeah, Vishal, it's a great question because it comes up significantly
Yeah.
in a lot of our conversations with just customers worldwide. It's the trade of speed versus comfort is a lot of times what that argument becomes or that comparison becomes. But I think the interesting thing to point out here is when you think about an 8 to 10 hour mission, whether it's Mumbai, Tokyo, Mumbai, Washington, D.C., or whatever, East Coast of the United States, these are long missions. However, when you think about whether it's 8,000 nautical miles, 8, 10 hours, 7,000 nautical miles, these airplanes that are purpose built are not flying at Mach 1.0 for that entire mission. On average, it's about Mach 0.9, Mach 0.94-ish, where that goes. And ultimately, BBJ versus, let's say, a Gulfstream or Bombardier, one of their larger class airplanes competing, they're going to get there about a half an hour to an hour sooner. Okay, so there is a value of speed that's there. However, when you think about the amenities that are on the airplane and the comfort that are on the airplane, being on an aircraft that has a small fuselage diameter for 8 to 10 hours, with some of your closest friends, gets a little bit claustrophobic. So that value of space, that value of capability matters a lot to our customers, both in India and in other regions worldwide. So that becomes part of that 3x multiplier. But the other piece of it is the full size amenities that are on the aircraft. When you think about a queen size or a king size bed, being able to get that rest, then also having a full size shower, being able to rest and refresh, hop off the airplane, not go to the hotel, not refresh, not worry about transportation, and be able to go directly to a meeting or directly to your engagement, all of a sudden that flips the value advantage from a speed purpose built aircraft to a Bizliner, which has all those full size amenities, where it's one stop shopping to do everything, and you can get off that aircraft and go about your business. So it definitely is one of those things where if you look at it in totality or holistically, and you look at the entire experience of travel, not just the flight portion of it, there's a significant advantage of having a Bizliner because of all of the other things it can do. So, and cabin comfort just happens to be one of those things. It's the other pieces that are built into it that make it a fully integrated solution.
So that makes me ask you, players like Gulfstream and Bombardier, they're pushing speeds near Mach 1 and ranges over 8,000 nautical miles. When a client is choosing between a purpose built jet and a BBJ 737 MAX, what is the key feature that always tilts the scales back to Boeing?
Yeah, and it's funny because I wouldn't categorize it as one feature. I like to say fly with more. And it's a very open-ended message, right? It's very marketing to say fly with more. But what that means is you're flying with more capacity. You're flying with more reliability. You're flying with more maintainability. You're flying with more efficiency. So all of these things in totality are much more important than speed. And then you're flying with more, the more efficiency piece, they cost less to operate. So it's almost counterintuitive when you think about a 737 versus a G650, G700, you're thinking about size. Well, they're not really all that different in size. However, when you think about a 737 specifically, it's one of the most efficient airplanes on the planet. So all of a sudden, your cost basis moves down significantly. So that efficiency, the operating cost of that aircraft is lower. So it's not just about speed. It becomes about, well, what's the operating dynamics of this airplane and the cabin comfort and this. So you're flying with more of all of these features. So the killer feature per se isn't necessarily one thing. It's a collection of things that make it a killer feature.
Can you walk me through how a BBJ sale typically happens?
The answer is it really depends. When you think about our customer sets, we have segments in, ultra high net worth individuals. You have customer segments in head of state, government, corporate, and charter. Those are typically our four business segments. But then you also see these crossover customers, which are airlines, commercial airlines that operate maybe that head of state airplane, right? And that's like the Uzbekistan's around the world or China. So there's a variety of airlines that have head of state airplanes in their fleet. So there's kind of five segments. All of them vary in the way a sale can actually happen. But typically, we stay in very good contact with our customer sets. We look hard out in the marketplace to see who has what airplane, what fleet, what's the age of that aircraft, how are they flying it, what are their mission requirements to make sure we're having those preliminary discussions with them about future airplane, replacing the current aircraft they have. So it all starts with a customer relationship, regardless of the segment. It's just those relationships vary depending on the person that you're dealing with. Ultra and high net worth, it could be a family office with government head of state, it could be the Air Force, right? And the procurement agents that are there. So just that engagement might change a little bit, but it always starts with that relationship. And that journey can be anywhere from months to multiple years, depending on what that cycle looks like. With governments and head of state, it typically is a longer process because you have a procurement cycle, you have elections, you have, just the governmental procurement cycle tends to be a little bit longer. With ultra high net worth corporations, it can tend to be a little bit faster, but they're never usually overnight. It's usually years in the making where you're building that trust with that relationship or with that customer, building that relationship so they understand the value proposition of the airplane. And then you work through that selling process and contracting. And then we work through a preliminary contract, a proposal, and then a definitive contract. Then the airplane gets in the production system, and then so on and so forth. And we follow it through the system, goes into completion, then it gets delivered. So it's a very accordion-like process, but it always starts with a great positive relationship with that potential customer or existing customer, depending on who they are. But it ranges in time.
And what's the delivery time period currently?
Yeah, I won't articulate when our specific production availability is right now. That's stuff information that we really rely on our sales teams to share with our customers in terms of like when you can get an airplane out of the Boeing factory. However, once it leaves the Boeing factory and goes into completion, Boeing can manage that for a customer, or the customer can manage it, or they can hire a person. Typically, the completion process on a 737 can be 12 to 18 months to complete the airplane after it's left the factory. For a wide body aircraft like a 787, it can be 24 to 36 months because you just have bigger cabin stuff. But unfortunately, Vishal, I can't tell you about availability just because it's proprietary information. And we really rely on our sales teams to have that discussion with our customers.
All right. Will it be similar to, let's say, an airline ordering a 737 MAX and the kind of timelines that they would have, they would be getting? Or do you think a BBJ customer would get it slightly more sooner? The timelines would differ?
Yes, timelines will differ. We have allocated positions in our production skyline for our VIP customers. Whether you're government, head of state, corporate, ultra high net worth, you will typically get your aircraft sooner. It's one of the value propositions of our BBJs is to get them sooner than the airline will. So I won't speak to what time that is, but it is definitely sooner because these customers typically want those airplanes sooner than our commercial customers. And so that's part of the value add of buying a BBJ.
I will come back to the Indian market, Chris. Wings India 2026 is almost upon us. With Navi Mumbai Airport now open and Noida International Airport hopefully around a quarter away, the parking slot crisis in India is finally easing. Do you expect this infrastructure expansion to lead to a surge in Bizliner orders in 2026 and in the coming years?
In my opinion with that is that I think having additional airports, I'll come back to business aviation. I'm going to start with the overall aviation picture. I think having more airports creates more capacity, limits the slot constraints, lifts an entire industry up, right? So I do believe aviation as a whole in India is going to grow as a result of these two new airports. Now, will it have a direct impact on demand and interest in business aviation? I think that's to be determined. I think we have to wait and see. I speculate that it won't be a direct effect on interest. It won't be a direct effect on demand. I think it'll be an indirect effect because it'll create more space, more ability, more capacity in an aviation industry as a whole. I truly think that a bottleneck in any business aviation business aviation industry is two things. One, it's supply chain, right? Can the OEMs build their airplanes fast enough for the marketplace? And whether that's the supplier delivering it to the OEM or the OEM just being able to deliver on time. That's a huge constraint. Boeing is a part of that. The other piece is the infrastructure, right? And if you think about India, having a mature FBO system and multiple FBOs, I think is going to be a bigger influencer on like maybe demand of aircraft in India specifically, whether it's Bizliners or whether it's turboprop airplanes and everything in between. I think just having that infrastructure on the business aviation side is far more critical for those customers than maybe international airports. However, having more capacity to serve more aircraft will always benefit an entire industry.
Is the lack of a dedicated FBO still the primary bottleneck in your opinion?
In my opinion, it's OEM manufacturing and supply chain, and then also FBO infrastructure in a marketplace. Specifically, India is a great example of that.
Right. Just a quick reminder to most of you listening to the show regularly, but do not subscribe to it yet. Please do press the follow, subscribe button, one of those on your podcast app. Okay? Back to you now, Chris. The Indian government operates two Boeing custom 777-300ERs for VVIP movement. It's operated by the Indian Air Force. Has this head of state presence in Indian skies created a halo effect for BBJ, or do you think it actually makes private corporations hesitant to buy Boeing because they don't want to appear too grand?
Totally understand. And it's an interesting balance, is what I would say. I'll start with addressing the 777s that the Indian Air Force flies for the government. I think in general, whether you speak about the Indian Air Force or you talk about the Royal Australian Air Force in Australia or the United States Air Force here in the US, Boeing aircraft are built on reliability. These are a commercial airplane derivative, effectively, right? So you have all of the benefits of a commercial aircraft, something that can fly 5,000 flight hours per year. BBJs aren't flying that much. They're flying 400 or 500, so a tenth of what you're seeing, but they're built on reliability. That's why you see governments buying these aircraft. It isn't necessarily for the luxury, because I've really pushed hard to pivot away from luxury for a variety of reasons, and I'll come back to that. But thinking more about productivity and reliability. What can these aircraft do for command and control? What can these aircraft do for leadership around the world? And it's that flying boardroom, right? And so when you think about two 777s that are in the Indian Air Force fleet, it's about command and control and carrying leadership and the entourages for those leadership as well. But it needs to be reliable. An airplane that's sitting on the ground when the head of state needs to get on it and fly away, and it's got an AOG incident, is not a good look for Boeing, and it's not a good look for the Indian government. So reliability is epicenter when it comes to our head of state airplanes. So that would mean that there's definitely a halo effect when it comes to corporations, when it comes to ultra high net worth. They see that level of reliability, they see that level of confidence. And so now you can trust the aircraft when you walk out to it and you need to leave on time to a specific destination in a certain amount of time. You know that your airplane will turn on and it'll fly away, right? It leads in dispatch reliability. So that becomes a huge thing. When it comes to luxury, we're very careful about that because we don't want corporations or even heads of state to be turned off by the word luxury. Oh, it's gold plated. Oh, it's too expensive. What are our voters going to think? What are the people that are electing our officials going to think? What are our shareholders going to think about the aircraft we're purchasing and how it sits on our books? So it's things like that we work really, really hard to make sure the airplane isn't perceived that way. Yes, could you outfit it with gold-plated interior? Absolutely, if you wanted to. However, over 90% of the airplanes are not that way. They're multi-purpose, they're functional, they're productivity assets. So it's making sure the story is told the right way. That is part of the marketing role, but it's making sure that the industry and the client base understands that this aircraft can be configured in a variety of different ways. And 90% of the time, it's in a multi-purpose format, which is not luxurious. It's getting the job done and making sure it has the amenities to serve that purpose.
I know few global politicians who would love some gold in their aircraft.
I don't disagree. You are 100% correct.
So, all right, Chris. The BBJ 777X promises to connect any two cities on Earth non-stop. For an Indian global conglomerate with interests in South America or the US or Australia, is the 777X a realistic 2028/29 prospect, or is that strictly head of state territory for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I don't see the 777X as being a specific use case. It is that airplane that can connect any 2 points around the world, right? There's going to be no limit to what it can actually do. And to pause really on that point, we're really excited about the 777X as a commercial platform, and even more excited as a business jet platform because of like what it unlocks for our customers. Unfortunately, we're late, and we need to work on that as a team. And we're getting there. I sit here at Boeing Field in Seattle, Washington, here in the US, and I see the flight test airplanes fly behind me all the time, and we're getting there. So it's going to be really exciting when the airplane finally delivers. All that to be said, it's not specifically a head of state. Is it a flagship airplane? Absolutely. Will it be iconic? Absolutely. To replace maybe the 47s and the 47-8s that are out there, possibly when you have these folding wingtips, it becomes the next iconic feature. However, it's not just head of state. We have private customers that are considering 777Xs right now in different parts of the world. So for an Indian conglomerate, like a Tata, perchance, you could see an airplane like this existing in a fleet of airplanes where it could really connect those global destinations where they have manufacturing sites in these different sites, where it could be that no stop airplane to get to those destinations on time. So it is not, so to answer your question again, it is not specifically a head of state airplane. A lot of interest around it as a head of state airplane, but equally as much on the private side and on the corporation side as well, as a possible solution as an asset to help business get done.
Chris, Boeing has introduced BBJ Select. You guys are offering pre-designed modular interiors for the 737-7. For the Indian market, where owners traditionally love bespoke, high luxury customization, that's what I've read. Why should a billionaire choose a pre-designed cabin? Is this a move to compete with the faster delivery timelines of a Bombardier or a Gulfstream, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, there's more. There's definitely more to it. BBJ Select is really exciting, and we launched it right before I joined this team. So I had the opportunity of kind of being in that first wave, understanding what this offering is, and really seeing how it creates this competitive landscape in our portfolio. So BBJ Select, just quickly, was really it was a product or results of market research we were doing, and not about Gulfstream, not about Bombardier, not about Embraer, not about Dassault. It was really about not airline customers, but business aviation customers coming to us and wanting a competitively priced airplane with a shorter delivery timeline because it created a pricing stratification, right? We had aircraft that were at the highest level of pricing, giving something competitive or more attainable was the key because we had a lot of different buyers and a lot of different price sensitivity that we're interested in. So that was some feedback. The other market research we did was like, yes, bespoke is very, very important when it comes to a business jet. However, what we were seeing were trends in the industry where business jets were being configured very similarly. So what we did is it basically became this bell-shaped curve where traditional bespoke airplanes were starting to look a lot alike on the interior. Maybe your fabrics and your finishes were slightly different, but the configurations were quite similar. Everybody had a suite here. Everybody had maybe a conference room there, or a bar here, or a specific lounge there in the cabin of the airplane. From that, we saw these trends, these typical trends, and we started to pre-engineer those modules so that you would still be able to get the customization that you wanted, but it would come at a lower cost and a faster delivery because we pre-engineered all of it. Yes, it limits full bespoke, but you can still get that at Boeing. BBJ Select itself on a MAX 7 has 216 different combinations of interiors, so it's nearly fully bespoke. If you can think it up, you can probably do it. And then it comes at a cheaper price, and it can be delivered sooner. So it just starts to answer the question at a different price point, which makes it more competitive. Does that help us against the Bombardiers and the Gulfstreams? Indirectly, it did, but that's not why we went down that path. We went down that path based on market research that we were doing with our customer sets.
Amongst the BBJ 737-7, -8, and -9, which variant is seeing the most traction in the market? Is the range of the -7 more attractive for longer missions, or the real estate of -9 winning for large group shuttle missions?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And it's interesting because if you look at the BBJs that were built on the 737 NG platform, your BBJ 1, 2, 3, which is a 700, 800, and a 900 ER, right? Versus BBJ MAX 7, MAX 8, MAX 9. If you look at the original next generation BBJs, BBJ 1, 700s were the most popular airplane at the time. And I do think it was range related. But the interesting thing now is that if you look at just the airframe size, the 7 has gotten a little bit longer, a couple of meters longer, right? The commercial customers are driving that airplane to be bigger. But the MAX 8 is still the heart of the market on the commercial side, seating 170 people. So it's the appropriate size capability mix. That holds true on the business aviation side, where the MAX 8 is the more popular of all the airplanes right now. Granted, that has some sort of effect that the MAX 7 is not certified, but the MAX 8 has that interesting mix of size and that interesting mix of capability. So it's in the sweet spot, much like it is in the commercial side. It's in that sweet spot on the business aviation side. So it's become the more popular airplane. And so the interest around MAX 8s, the deliveries of the MAX 8s as BBJs, and any current interest has been really, really high around MAX 8. But all that to be said, the MAX 7 has the most range, but the 8 and the 9 are not that far behind. So really the way we look at this is when we go to a customer and we're talking about their needs and really understanding what their mission requirements are. It's trying to understand, well, how far do you want to fly and what kind of space do you want? Because all of the airplanes are comparable in range, but they change in terms of cabin space. So to make sure that you have all the amenities you want. So right now, MAX 8s seem to be, leading the popularity charge. It's the most that we've delivered on the business aviation side, more than MAX 9s. MAX 7s very, very soon. But I think it will always be a function of what are your mission requirements for your aircraft and what do you really need? Do you need 7,000 nautical miles or is 5,000 enough? And what does that look like in terms of your interior? Is it multi-purpose? Are you carrying troops with you with your dignitaries? Is it full on luxury interior or is it somewhere in between that, right? So I think those are the questions we always ask is that when we think about a BBJ Max, it's the same airplane. It just flies a little bit different, but it has three different sizes to allow you to really scale and scope what you need for your requirements.
So are you saying the Dash 8 is the most popular, or is that not what you're saying?
Oh, I would say that. Yeah, we've sold and delivered more Max 8s in BBJ configuration than Max 9s at this point, and the Max 7 is currently not certified. So just because of those dynamics, maybe popular is not the right word to use. Maybe it's just it's we're selling what we have currently certified, and between the Max 8 and the Max 9, the Max 8 is selling more. Is that more popular? I think it just meets the mission requirements of the customers.
One of Boeing's biggest strengths in India is the massive 737 footprint with Air India Express and Akasa, even with SpiceJet. Something you mentioned. How much of a selling point is the commercial MRO synergy for a BBJ owner? Can they truly get a part in, let's say, a smaller city like a Kochi or a Lucknow as easily as a commercial airline can?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? And these are concerns that our business operators have, whether they're in India or whether they're in the United States. Obviously, in the US, it's a little bit of a different argument to have, but it's still very true in developing nations. Southeast Asia, that corner of the world, this is a very big concern, is making sure that our business aviation operators, our BBJ customers, have access to the parts and services that they need. So we do worry a lot about that. So what we do is that we connect with those airlines, the Air Indias, the Akasas of the world, also the privately held MROs, whether it's a Jet Aviation or an AMOC or somebody like that, is making sure that there's infrastructure in place that we can either one partner with and set up some sort of contractual terms and conditions between Boeing, that airline, and that particular business jet operator, or just make sure they have access and they have a contact, right? So it kind of is mild to wild depending. So we leverage that to a varying degree depending on what the circumstances are for that business jet operator. Some business jet operators don't need us, others rely on us heavily for things like that. So we make sure they have the resources in place. And then that's just on the commercial side to make sure that they have access because you're not wrong when you think about an airplane that's AOG, and if it's Air India versus a private jet, who's going to have the better purchasing power and leverage at an outstation, right? That definitely becomes a problem. So it's things like that to make sure that that business jet operator has the appropriate spares provisioning and they can get access to those parts. If it's something that's on a pool, it's something that's on their own outstations, or if they're buying it through an Air India. So making sure that they can get the parts they need. The other piece of that is the Boeing support. And I kind of mentioned that before that we have dedicated sales and marketing support for India, but that's not as important as the customer support side. We have dedicated field service reps in region and dedicated customer support in region to ensure that there's somebody that a business jet operator in India can call on the phone and say, I need an IDG or I need this component for my airplane because I'm AOG. So they can get it as soon as possible and push that airplane back and fly. So we make sure we have dedicated human resource in region so that you're not calling the United States and somebody's sleeping and you're not getting the response you need. So a huge part of support is the assurance that you provide in making sure that somebody's answering the phone. And that seems like a simple thing, but Boeing support is something that we pride ourselves in supporting the airplane when they're out in the fleet, not just producing the airplane. So that's a huge part of it as well. That we walk our customers through that so they understand what support of their aircraft looks like and who they can call when they have a problem to make sure they get the support they need.
How heavily do you lean on the commercial MRO network of Air India or any other airline as a security blanket for your owners? Does that happen often?
I wouldn't say it happens often. It happens on occasion. It's definitely subject to the conversation and level of comfort that maybe that potential business jet user wants or needs. But then also, we being Boeing Business Jets will partner with our commercial brethren. So there's a sales director for Air India and there's a sales director for business jets in India. And so those two sales directors will talk and try and determine what the best solution is for that business jet customer. And it may be leveraging an airline like Air India or Akasa, but it doesn't always mean that. So it's case by case is how I would answer that. It depends on the level of comfort and support that potential or future customer needs, but it also depends on would an airline really want to support that. It needs to be beneficial on both sides, and usually we can find a beneficial partnership that's there. It just really depends on the circumstances. So it's case by case.
Sure. With India pushing for 1% SAF blending by 2027, how is BBJ assisting Indian owners in future proofing their flight departments? Is there a fear amongst your clients that private wide bodies or private jets for that matter will become the face of carbon shaming? And how does Boeing's technology mitigate that?
Yeah. Great question, Vishal. I mean, because this is such a big topic that it's going to take a globe and many governments and many manufacturers to really solve when it comes to aviation. But to answer the first part of your question, yes, we do have current customers and potential future customers that worry about the carbon shaming, that worry about the perception of business aviation and what that looks like. And then we have other customers that, I mean, I apologize for saying it this way, that might be a bit more apathetic and might not care as much. And it really depends on the region. It really depends on the customer and their level of sensitivity. And it depends, like I said, the region. I mean, Europe and the US versus maybe Southeast Asia, different regulatory environments, different public perceptions, all of that drives a lot of uncertainty into the marketplace and concern and things around sustainability. So we do work hard to make sure the marketplace understands, and when I say we, I mean Boeing, not just BBJ, but Boeing, the work we're doing in terms of sustainability. Most of our sustainability will be driven by the big enterprise, right? Because when you're selling 1,000 airplanes a year on the commercial side, the market expects you to introduce new technology, whether that's propulsion and engine, whether that's aerodynamics, whether that's fleet management, whether that's air traffic control, all of that stuff, all of that tech to make the aircraft more efficient in an industry, to make sure we're reducing our carbon footprint. That helps, but we need to be doing that stuff and talking about that stuff. Now, will that tech be offered on BBJ? Absolutely, because big Boeing will drive that tech inclusion, and product development on the Boeing side is developing that technology right now in partnership with maybe a GE or a Rolls or a Pratt, right? When you think about power plants, but aerodynamics and structure, we're doing that. So we're working on that stuff and talking about that stuff and sharing where it's appropriate with our customers so they can see the things that are coming down the production side of things and the development side. Now, will BBJ ever offer tech before commercial? It's happened in the past. Now, it's rare, but using a BBJ as an eco demonstrator or a test bed has happened in the past. And if you think about the blended winglet, that's where the blended winglet started. Multiple decades ago was on a BBJ aircraft before it went over to mainstream commercial. So there are those examples of where, hey, maybe there's an opportunity here with BBJ and a potential BBJ customer. Maybe it's not a Boeing owned airplane. Maybe it's a customer owned airplane. And we have a partnership where we're like, let's test this new tech on this airplane to see what we get. And we do have customers that are willing to use their aircraft as a test bed for things like that. So it can happen in one of two ways, whether it comes through the the product development cycle in Boeing, or maybe it comes through, limited tech that just gets installed on a test bed airplane, which potentially is a customer. So those are the things that we're working on as well to make sure that our business jets continue to improve when it comes to carbon footprint. Other things we're doing is obviously we've done commercial flights with 50% SAF. We're working towards 100% SAF fueled airplanes right now. So there's a variety of things that we're trying to approach from a variety of different angles, I think I would say. But perception of aviation, whether it's business or whether it's commercial, is huge. They see this contribution to a carbon footprint, and even though mathematically, it's less than 1% contribution to the carbon footprint around the globe, it's still the perception that you have to work on. So it's constantly making sure that you're working on things that are real and that will deliver on your claims, and then sharing that with the marketplace to really help the common person understand what's going on in aviation. So it's a much bigger play than just Boeing, but it requires a lot of different effort because it's a huge problem that we have, we being the globe, that we need to work on. So sorry to drone on a little bit, but it's such a big answer, to really come around to. But those are the things that we're trying to do to address it, to contribute our part to improving sustainability around the globe.
Many business jet owners often use them as mobile boardrooms with large teams. What is the most unique Indian specific interior request you have seen lately? Are we moving away from the gold and mahogany that era, towards the more Scandi minimalist digital office kind of?
It's interesting because I was thinking about this the other day. Where do I see? I often get asked the question, where do I see industry trends going for cabin interiors? And oftentimes it's hard to narrow it down to a specific region and go, well, in India, they only do it this way. Because I think what you find is that people that use airplanes, regardless of region, have specific needs in mind, right? And so that's independent of specific regions. So answering specifically for India is very, very difficult as a result. However, I can answer on a more global scale, and that's not to generalize. That's just to say that um, everyone kind of is doing the same thing, which is interesting. What I'm seeing is this migration away from lavish and luxury, right? There's people that are just naturally configuring their airplanes different. You don't see the opulence that you've seen in the past. Now, granted, there are regions that around the world, and we joked a little bit earlier that there are always going to be people that want gold-plated faucets, right? There's always going to be that operator. But I think in general, I think it's very, very safe to say, and this includes India when I say this, is that current operators and future operators, future customers and existing customers, they're all looking for an aircraft that can meet multiple requirements. And when we think about, I'll just start with ultra high net worth. When you think about ultra high net worth, or a magnet of a conglomerate, the head of an enterprise, they're not only using that jet for business purposes, but they're also vacationing and going on holiday with their family. So when you think about it, that aircraft, it's going to need a conference space, right? You're going to have meetings, or it's going to be a place to dine. It's a communal space, but you're going to need to have a room for privacy. And that could be because you're traveling with your grandkids and you want to shove them in a room and you want them to be quiet, or it could be because you need to take that critical business call. So you see these multi-purposes. There could be a lounge area. There could be an entertainment area with a big screen TV. There could be a suite or two suites, depending on who you're traveling with, right? So we're starting to see these aircraft take shape in more of a multi-purpose fashion. That's where I see the trends going in terms of configuration. It started with head of state, where head of state customers were like, hey, we're going to travel with our ministers, but we also need to take some of the entourage as well. So now you're having like triples being put back in the back of the airplane, but the front of the airplane is much more head of state. So you're seeing this mix of configuration, and that's happening a lot more even in ultra high net worth and in corporate settings, because they're carrying more people, they're doing different things. The mission requirements are changing and evolving, which drive the configuration changes. So that's kind of the trend I'm seeing. The other thing is materials, right? We have companies out there that are really game changers when it comes to textiles, the fabrics, the finishes, the materials that are being used for countertops. All of this is becoming more sustainable, but it's also becoming lighter, which is going to improve fuel efficiency and sustainability as well from a fuel burn standpoint. But you're seeing a lot of changes in like material fits and finishes as well. So not only are the cabin configurations starting to look a little bit different, you're starting to see the materials look a little bit different that are going into them. So I feel like we're on this cusp of major change when it comes to business jet interiors, where there's going to be a radical change in the materials that are used and how those are created, manufactured, and even disposed of at the end of the life cycle. But then also the cabin configurations are kind of moving in a different direction. There will always be opulent interiors, but I think they're becoming that smaller percentage where multi-purpose aircraft are starting to become much more prevalent, both in head of state and in corporate, kind of conglomerate lives.
With the rise of the fractional ownership model in India, is Boeing looking at jet cards or shared ownership marketing for the BBJ? Or will it remain an exclusive ownership only asset for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, Vishal, that's a great question because in other markets, it's so popular, right? When you see a mature market like Europe, you see fractional ownership. You see a lot of fractional ownership. It may not be on the Bizliner category of size, but you definitely see it in that middle echelon. And the same is true in the United States as well when it comes to fractional ownership. So in India, I think we're going to have to wait and see. As the business aviation market matures and grows and continues to evolve, I think we might see more of it. Will it ever happen on the business jet or the BBJ side of things? We're open to it. We think about it. I think where you're going to see maybe disruptors is in aviation management companies and charter companies that are buying these jets and selling charter hours versus fractional ownership. That's where I think the innovation will probably happen in India first. We have even had some preliminary conversations with customers in India about starting their own aviation management company or starting their own charter operations. So again, different ways to own and operate airplanes. So that innovative ownership model, I think, will continue to grow and evolve. Will it be fractional ownership? Will it be something else? I think we'll see how that goes. And we're obviously involved in conversations with potential customers and current customers to try and see where that's at. It just hasn't materialized that much on a Bizliner, on that size category of airplane just yet.
All right. Let's talk about your friends across the pond. Um,
I love them.
yeah, I'm sure you do. I'm sure they love you too. Airbus is pushing the ACJ 220 hard as a value proposition. If you were in room with an Indian promoter who's split between the ACJ and the BBJ, what is the one Boeing exclusive feature that you believe closes the deal? Maybe the duel with ACJ is not Gulfstream-esque. It's slightly different. It's a
It's slightly different.
proposition.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And all joking aside, I joked and I said that I love them, which is true. I think to have a really strong market and have good offerings and good innovation for customers, you have to have strong competition. And I know my counterpart at the competition, and we compare notes. Obviously, we don't show everything, but it's great to catch up when we go to industry events and talk about things because I think it's really important to have great competition. And their aircraft are fantastic, to be honest. Ours are great, theirs are great. Market speaks to both of them, so there you have it. But when it comes to the ACJ 220 specifically, I felt let's talk about the A220 first. I think that it's an interesting airplane to have in commercial, and I think it's going to be successful. Obviously, they're having maintainability and reliability issues right now. The Airbus and the engine manufacturer will work through that, and things will improve because that's good for the industry. It's never good to have a lack of confidence around an airframe, regardless who manufactures that airplane, because that's not good for the industry and it's not good for perception. So we want all OEMs to be healthy because that makes a stronger marketplace. And so the A220, I think, is going to be a formidable competitor in the marketplace, regardless if it's against a 37 or something smaller like an Embraer airplane, like a 195, whatever that looks like. But when you come into business aviation, I think there's still the verdict is still out, is my opinion on this. And I think if you bring in the reliability challenges of the airplane, the lack of an installed base in business aviation, specifically in India, right? There's no A220s on the commercial side flying around. There's no ACJ 220s flying around right now. It's not certified. So that creates a vacuum of infrastructure. Where on the flip side, there's 737s flying everywhere, right? There's even A320s flying everywhere. So it's like all of a sudden you have this different ecosystem that creates confidence or a lack of confidence. And so those are the discussions we have. It's like, hey, think about support of your aircraft once it's installed in the fleet, once it's been delivered. What does that look like? You don't want to be on an island all alone. That's part of the discussion. But the other thing is like, well, what are your mission capabilities? What do you want to do with this aircraft? Space, flight times, where are you going? What are you going to use it for? And when you think about an ACJ 220 that doesn't have fuel tanks in it yet, and they're working to get that certified, it's going to be a two-stop airplane to go to the United States, right? Where a single-aisle airplane or a narrow-body airplane like a 37, yes, it'll probably be a one-stop airplane. You stop in Shannon, Ireland, and then you make it to the US. Or an 87 goes all the way. So I think you still have to have this discussion about what are your mission requirements for your aircraft and what does that look like? Reliability and maintainability factor into the operation, but when you start from the beginning, where do you want to go and what are you going to use it for? And then you start looking at, oh, that's an interesting mission link. You're going to need two stops to get there. That creates disruption. So it's less about cabin size because an A220 is not that much smaller than a 737. But at the same time, you're thinking about how far can it fly? Really, what's its range capability? And that starts to change the dynamic. So it's installed base, it's network infrastructure, it's in the ecosystem that the airplane will exist in a particular country, in a particular fleet. But then it's also, can the airplane just do the job that you want it to do? So we make sure we have those conversations with those companies and those customers to make sure I'm like, what's that look like when you're trying to be competitive and what can the airplane do?
We see Indian conglomerates like Reliance partnering with Dassault for local Falcon manufacturing. We should be hearing soon about Embraer possibly opening a FAL in India. That's probably coming up around Wings India. In a market where local presence is becoming a political and an economic asset, how does Boeing ensure BBJ remains the aspirational choice for India's growing billionaire class?
It's an important question that always needs to be answered in any of our business transactions, whether it's on the commercial side or the business aviation side. And so when I think about India and Boeing, not just BBJ, but talking at Boeing at the Boeing enterprise level. We've been partnered with the country of India for over 80 years in terms of aviation, right? Both on the defense and the commercial side. That level of partnership, that level of commitment, that level of promise that we have with the country is making sure there is an industrial partnership that's there, that there is localized work that's being done there, right? And so if you just look at today, Boeing sources, I think about $1.25 billion in advanced technology coming from the Indian market of manufacturing and tech coming into Boeing airplanes. So it's a major amount of money that's being spent in India by the Boeing company. And we also have over 300 different suppliers that are in India as well that supply this advanced technology, that supply components to our Boeing aircraft. Also, we have Boeing offices that are in Boeing or that are in India as well. I think we employ over 6,000 individuals in India as well. So we have a major commitment to the country of India, and that will continue, and it's only going to grow. So when we get in conversations with business jets, so that's at the enterprise level. So when we get into the business jet conversation and then it comes up, we make sure we pull in our Boeing Global group, right? We pull them in. We have this discussion with that potential customer, that potential conglomerate, or whatever that looks like, even head of state. We pull them together and we're making sure that Boeing Global and sales and marketing and the engineering programs, we're all talking and understanding what can be done to answer these requests that are being made by these potential customers to localize work and what that actually looks like. Because that is an important part of that, is localizing work to make sure that people are gainfully employed and working on the products that ultimately those local companies are going to be buying and placing in that location, those airplanes. So it's a long kind of broad answer, but it comes up significantly. India is one of the biggest countries that we do invest in, and we want to make sure we continue doing that. So if we're working with a specific conglomerate in India and that becomes a request, immediately we pull in our Boeing Global Group and we try and understand what can be done and work through kind of a discussion and a dialogue of what will make that commitment come to fruition and come to reality. So both sides win. Both Boeing can sell an airplane, but also the country is benefited as well. Not just the user of the airplane, but the country benefits as well.
Can we see some sort of local assembly in the coming years?
I think it'll be up to the enterprise. I'm not sure totally what we're looking at in terms of localizing manufacturing work and production work. It's things that I'm just not privy to in my current position, so I don't think I could answer that effectively.
All right. And with that, I want to thank you very much, Chris, for doing this.
No, Vishal, thank you for reaching out to me. And Keelan, thank you for being open because I really wanted to have an opportunity to talk about Boeing. I mean, again, Vishal, it's a great day to work in aviation, is it not? These are good times. And thank you for your patience so that we could do this. Thank you for reaching out and the opportunity. It's always great to talk about Boeing airplanes. I'm excited about it. And thank you for the compliments about the Boeing company and the AvGeeks that are out there. Again, if I could say this again, I'd like to, is that we're fortunate. Boeing is very, very, very fortunate that we have people that believe in us, whether it's AvGeeks like yourself or even heads of state that are sticking by our side through the troubled times. We're really, really fortunate, and I count my blessings every day when I come in. I work for a great company where I believe in the product. But when we've made mistakes over the past few years, to have loyal companions and friends that have stuck by us, we're extremely fortunate, and we owe it to that community to do better. And we are, right? We've had a better year in 2025. I think 2026 is going to be fantastic for us, but you got to stay humble and continue to work hard to make sure we honor the commitment and the loyalty to people like yourself. So thank you for the kind words, but we owe you good airplanes, and that's what we're going to continue to deliver.
And that was Chris Shindle from Boeing Business Jets. I don't know about you, but I've spent the last 40 minutes mentally redecorating a 737 MAX. Huge thanks to Chris for giving us a peek behind the curtain of the Bizliner world and explaining how Boeing stays ahead in the high-stakes game of mine is bigger than yours. Next Sunday, the Indian AvGeeks episode 18 will feature Shraddha Agarwal from Grapes. As for the Indian AvGeek, we will return in a fortnight with episode number 60 and the head for Lufti in India and South Asia. For now, don't forget to subscribe and share this episode of the Indian AvGeek with your fellow AvGeeks. Chris is not on X, but you will find me everywhere, including Blue Sky, at Vishal Mehra. Happy to have your feedback. With that, keep your tray tables up, your seatbelts fastened. I wish you well, and happy flying, my friends!